It starts with a whisper, a question so innocent, yet so heavy it seems to crack the air in a busy supermarket aisle. It's a question a child should never have to ask, a question that points to a hunger deeper than an empty stomach, a cold that has nothing to do with the weather. For one single man, aimlessly wandering the cereal aisle on a Tuesday afternoon, a question like that wasn't just something he overheard. It was a summons. It was the moment the quiet, orderly world he'd built for himself was broken open by the raw reality of someone else's struggle. He couldn't have known it then, but that small, trembling voice would set off a chain of events that would not only change the life of a struggling family, but completely redefine his own. This is a story about how a simple act of listening, a moment of choosing empathy over indifference, can unleash a wave of kindness so powerful it can wash away shame and rewrite a future. The fluorescent lights of the Value Mart hummed their usual monotonous tune, a sound Mark had long ago learned to ignore on his weekly grocery runs. It was a place for lists and errands, for predictable patterns. As a single man in his late 30s, his life was well organized: work, gym, and quiet evenings. He liked the quiet. He'd built his life around it. But on this particular afternoon, the quiet was shattered. Not by a crash or a shout, but by 6 small words that hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Are we bad people, Mama?" The voice was tiny, belonging to a little boy no older than 6, with wide, worried eyes fixed on the woman beside him. She was young, but her face was etched with a weariness that didn't belong. Her shopping cart was nearly empty, holding only a carton of milk, a loaf of store-brand bread, and a small bag of rice. The boy had been looking at a brightly colored box of cereal, the kind with the cartoon mascot. His mother had gently shaken her head, her expression a mix of apology and pure exhaustion. And then came the question, that soul-crushing, world-tilting question. "Are we bad people, Mama?" For a second, the world just stopped. The hum of the lights, the rattle of carts, the tinny overhead music, it all faded. There was only the boy's question, hanging in the air. Thick with shame, he was too young to possibly understand. Mark stood frozen, a box of oatmeal forgotten in his hand, feeling like he was intruding on an intensely private, painful moment. The mother knelt, her back to Mark, and pulled her son close. He couldn't hear her reply, but he saw her shoulders shake. He saw the boy bury his face in her thin coat. And Mark, a man who built his life around avoiding complications, felt something profound shift inside him. He quickly turned, abandoning his own shopping list, and walked away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt like a coward, running from a scene that had nothing to do with him. Yet he couldn't shake it. All through the store, as he mechanically grabbed things from shelves, the boy's voice echoed in his mind. "Are we bad people?" What kind of desperation, what cycle of quiet no's and empty cupboards leads a child to think that being poor is a moral failing? What had this little boy seen to make him connect no with bad? Mark paid for his groceries, the cashier's friendly chatter just a distant buzz. He drove home, but the familiar streets of his quiet suburb felt alien. His apartment, usually his sanctuary, felt empty and cold. He unpacked his groceries, and the abundance of food on his counter suddenly felt obscene. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's earnest, confused face and heard that devastating question. He thought about his own life of comfort and choice. He could buy name-brand cereal without a second thought. He could go out to dinner if he didn't feel like cooking. He had never once had to look at a price tag and feel a pang of shame. This wasn't guilt. It was deeper. It was a jarring recognition of the invisible walls that separate one person's reality from another's, sometimes in the very same grocery aisle. The boy hadn't just asked his mother a question. He had unknowingly held up a mirror to Mark, and Mark didn't like the reflection of a man who could just walk away. He knew, with the certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't let it go. He had to do something. He didn't know this family, their story, or what they needed. But he knew what he heard, and he knew that the answer to that boy's question had to be a resounding, life-affirming no. The next day, Mark woke up with a purpose. The idea was a little crazy, a bit unorthodox, but it felt right. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was comfortable. He had savings, a steady job as a graphic designer, and no one depending on him. He decided to plan an act of kindness, but he wanted it to be anonymous, something that felt less like charity and more like a stroke of unbelievable luck. He didn't want to be a savior. He just wanted to be a quiet force that nudged their world back into place. His first step was returning to the Value Mart. He felt like a detective, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. He described the mother and son to the store manager, a kind-faced man named George. He explained vaguely that he'd seen a family struggling and wanted to help. George, a veteran of the retail world, had seen it all. He listened patiently. "I know who you mean," he said softly. "Sarah and her boy Leo. She works a couple of cleaning jobs, but it's tough, real tough." George explained that Sarah was a regular, always polite, always trying to make ends meet, often using a calculator to stay within her tight budget. Mark's plan started to come together. It was ambitious, and he needed a conspirator. He laid out the idea for George, who looked at him with a new respect. "You want to do what?" George asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Son, in all my years, I've never seen anything like this." The plan was simple on the surface. Mark wanted to create a customer appreciation day for just one customer, Sarah. He gave George a significant amount of cash. The next time Sarah came to check out, she'd be told she was the store's 100,000th customer and her entire purchase was free. But it wouldn't stop there. The prize would also include a huge gift card for the store, enough to cover her groceries for months. And to address the question that started it all, there would be a separate, smaller gift card for the toy aisle, with a note that said, "For the best boy in the world, because you are good." Mark's hands were trembling as he handed the cash to George in the back office. It was a huge chunk of his savings, but the fear was nothing compared to the thrilling feeling that this was the right thing to do. George promised to handle it with care, prepping a trusted cashier named Maria. All Mark had to do now was wait. He felt a strange connection to this mother and child he didn't even know, their lives now secretly tangled with his. It could be days, maybe a week. The waiting was its own kind of torture, a tight knot of anticipation in his chest. 4 days later, Mark's phone rang. It was George. "She's here," he whispered. "She's in the produce section. Get here if you can. You're gonna want to see this." Mark's heart leapt. He grabbed his keys and drove, probably breaking a few traffic laws on his way to the Value Mart. He slipped in through a side door and met George near the dairy case where they could watch the checkout lanes unseen. And he saw them. Sarah and Leo. The cart was once again sparsely filled. Leo was holding his mother's hand, walking quietly beside her. There was no joy in the trip, just the grim task of getting food. They got in Maria's checkout lane. Mark held his breath, his palms sweating. He watched as Maria scanned the few items: milk, bread, eggs, a small bag of apples. The total was just over $20. Sarah reached into her worn purse, her movement slow. As she pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and some change, Maria held up a hand, a bright smile on her face. "Wait just a moment," she exclaimed loud enough for others to hear. "George, can you come here, please? I think we have a winner." George walked over, clipboard in hand, looking official. "Well, what you know. Ma'am, it looks like you are the 100,000th customer to come through our doors this year. Congratulations." Sarah just stared at him, her face a mask of total disbelief. What? What does that mean?" Leo looked from his mom to the smiling employees, completely confused. "It means," George announced grandly, "that your entire grocery bill today is on us. And that's not all."
He handed her a crisp envelope. As our grand prize winner, you also get this $500 gift card for your next shopping trips. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. She was speechless, just shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. I don't understand, she stammered. This can't be real. Maria chimed in, oh, it's very real, and we have one more thing. She leaned over the counter and handed a smaller, brightly colored envelope directly to Leo. This is for you, little man. Leo took it, fumbling with the seal. Inside was a $50 toy store gift card and a small printed note. He looked at the words, too young to read them all, and handed it to his mom. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now. As she read the note aloud, her voice choked with emotion.
We often underestimate the ripple effect of a single act of kindness. We see a problem and feel too small to fix it, so we turn away. But as Mark's story shows, you don't have to change the entire world to completely change someone's world. Sometimes all it takes is listening, paying attention to the quiet struggles happening all around us. Think about a time you saw someone in need. What held you back from acting? Let us know your story in the comments. And if this story moved you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that good people are everywhere. The story could have ended there, with Mark slipping away, forever the anonymous stranger. But things don't always work out that way. A few weeks later, Mark was back at the Valley Mart. As he was deciding which coffee to buy, a small voice piped up beside him. That one is my mom's favorite. He looked down, and there was Lito, pointing to a bag of coffee. He was holding a brand new toy robot in his other hand. His face was brighter, his eyes holding a spark that wasn't there before. A few feet away stood Sarah. She looked different too. The deep lines of exhaustion on her face had softened. She still looked tired, but she stood taller. A quiet confidence there that had replaced her defeated posture. She looked at Mark, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. You were there, she said softly, in the cereal aisle, a few weeks ago. Mark was stunned. Yes, I was. I saw you, she continued, taking a step closer. You heard him, didn't you? Mark's face flushed. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded. She gave him a small, watery smile. I never believed it was random, she said, the 100,000th customer. It felt like an answer to a prayer I was too tired to even whisper. She paused, gathering her words. You don't know what you did for us. It wasn't just the money, though God knows that helped. It was the note. The note you wrote for my son. It wasn't a question. She knew. Maybe it was a mother's instinct, but in that moment, the anonymity Mark had so carefully built just dissolved. He carries it with him, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He asks me to read it to him every night. For the best boy in the world, because you are good. You didn't just give us food. You gave him back his innocence. You gave me back my hope. Mark was speechless. He'd only wanted to fix a single moment of pain. He never imagined he'd become part of their lives. Over the next few weeks, they started talking, timidly at first, then with a growing ease. Mark learned that Sarah was a widow. Her husband had died in a car accident 2 years ago. She'd been working 2, sometimes 3 part-time cleaning jobs to keep them afloat. But a recent illness had put her behind on everything. She wasn't looking for a handout, just a chance. Mark found himself drawn into their world, not as a savior, but as a friend.
He helped Sarah put together a proper resume. He used his graphic design skills to make a professional flyer for her own small cleaning business. He started joining her and Leo for picnics in the park on weekends. His quiet, orderly life was suddenly filled with the chaotic, beautiful sound of a child's laughter and the warmth of a woman's smile. The empty space in his apartment was now filled with Leo's drawings on the fridge and the sense of Sarah's home cooking, something she insisted on sharing to repay him. One evening, as he was helping Leo build a fortress of blocks on his living room floor, Sarah watched them from the doorway. "You know," she said softly, "for the longest time, I felt like we were being punished. Like we were bad people, and that's why everything was so hard." Mark stopped and looked at her. "You were never bad people, Sarah. You were just people who needed a little bit of good to happen." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made his heart ache in the best way. "You were our good. You were the good that happened." The single man who went to the grocery store for oatmeal found something he hadn't even known he was missing. He hadn't just changed their lives, they had completely transformed his. He had learned that a home isn't just four quiet walls. It's the sound of a kid's laughter, the warmth of a shared meal, and the stunning realization that sometimes the greatest kindness isn't about what you give, but what you're willing to receive in return. And that the answer to a child's heartbreaking question can be found in the most unexpected places, not in a word, but in an action, an outstretched hand, and a shared life.